Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army Ray Stryler. He's going to talk to you about when he was in Vietnam. He's got a great PowerPoint presentation. Castillo, you want to close the hatch, but put the blue can so it doesn't secure all the way. Thank you. And talk about his time, his tour in Vietnam, and also introduce you. You write your books as well, right, sir? Awesome. Okay, so give the colonel your undivided attention there, kids, gang, cadets, and welcome them aboard.
Want me to dim the lights?
Not turn off one, and then no, the other one, and then dim it. Is that dull enough, or do we need to make it darker?
Put a slide up.
I guess I got to put a slide on there, huh?
Oh, yeah, leave that one up there. That's good.
Okay.
Can you see the slide?
I'm going to go like that.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yes, sir. Would you like to remote again, sir?
Essentially, I think that works pretty good. Essentially, I fought two wars. One in Vietnam and two in Vietnam. Now that sounds crazy, I know, but I say that because the first time I was over there in 1966 to 67 for 1 year, I was working with Special Forces, and I was in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam. I'll explain all that. And then the second, and I was under the leadership of President Johnson, and his mission was to locate and destroy the enemy. And he plussed up the force all the way up to 500,000 troops. He started in 1965 with the Marines landing up in North Vietnam, First Corps of South Vietnam, Da Nang or way up in that area. And then it gradually went up, 500,000 troops in Vietnam. And then the second time, my second war, was the second time I was over there for a year. I was over there in 1969 and 70. I missed the good year of 68. But I was this time with an American unit, leading a battalion of infantrymen. And I was fortunate to take him into Cambodia in May of 1970 when we made the incursion into Cambodia. If you hold your questions till the end, would probably work better, but if you have to ask that question, go ahead and shoot the question up. Stand at attention and ask the question. That's the only thing I require. This is Indochina, and we were there from roughly 1965 to 1975 with the large troops. We actually had small troops over there sent over by JFK, the president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, in 1959. That's the first time we put troops on the ground. But they were advisors, small units. And then when President Johnson came in, he plussed up the force. So this is the second Indochina War. The first one was the battle against the French to kick them out of Vietnam. So the Viet Minh kicked the French out in 1954, set up a peace accord, and they divided the country in half. This is South Vietnam, that's North Vietnam, and the neighboring countries are Laos and Cambodia. These two were neutral countries, supposedly. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese used it for the Ho Chi Minh Trail coming down through there. And they always came down to, a lot of them came down to my area where my camp was. Camp Tan Rai was right there at that location. Okay, so this is the Special Forces camp. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about it. First of all, you got to have a camp in which to house the soldiers and the Special Forces guys. So this is a five-sided. One of the first times we put up a five-sided camp. Prior to this, Special Forces had a triangular camp. We found this a little bit better because we put the machine guns out here and outside. We put one company here and one company on each one of the wings. And then the inner circle is only for the Americans, the Vietnamese, the Loc Long Doc Viet, and also a crack unit from the Thailand I used as the guard on the inside, and intelligence forces. This is what a camp commander looks like at that period of time. A little different than I look today. This shortest day of this year, December 21st, I'll be an octogenarian. What the hell is that? 80 years old is what it is. So this is when I was 26 years old. And I was the camp commander of A232. This is my team, half of my team. It was hard to get 12 of them together at one time, so I got half of them together. That's me on the lower left, my team sergeant, and others. Had to have my counterpart, and he was Vietnamese, and he had a team of 12 people, the Loc Long Doc Viet LLDB, and we together would recruit and train and deploy about 800 mountain yards. What's a mountain yard? Well, the French called them that. These are the Central Highland minority folks. They're not Vietnamese, they are a minority group living in Vietnam. And a lot of them come out of the Triangle area up in Vietnam, Laos, and China. But we worked with the Coho sect of the mountain yards. And this is them coming off of this little bridge is right next to our camp. And this is them coming off of an operation. So there's a company of troops right there up into the jungles of Vietnam. About 150 people in this little group here. And I would always try to send 2 Americans with each one of the groups. Pair up Americans so they could watch each other, help each other, call in air support when we got in a fight and so on. This is a radio man, another mountain yard. And this is one of the first weapons they captured after I got to camp. It's a PPS H-41, which is a submachine gun. It's an old thing. And some of these weapons we captured are made by the Chinese, some are made by the Russians, some are made by East Germans, all around the world. And this is how we built our camp. We went around and cut all the trees out. We called them pecker poles. I don't know why they did that, but anyhow, we took these pecker poles and put them in the ground. And then in between there, we filled it in with dirt and rocks and everything else available. And then that was the inner perimeter wall. And then we had an outer perimeter wall as well. So we had tools to work with. I had a couple of bulldozers that I was able to work with to help with the runway and to help with all other aspects of building the camp. Every week we'd get our food supplies in and our mail call, and this is portioning out the food. We would get 5 cows in, our buffalo, mostly cows, and we would get 5 large bags of rice, and we would get 5 vegetables. These are the vegetables right here that you're seeing. They're parceling out. And very easy. Each company took 1/5 of each one of that supply that came in. Came in on a CV2, a Caribou, and dropped the supplies, dropped the mail, and then went on. So here we are, mail call. Once a week we'd get a letter, and most people would write every day, and then return the people back home would write every day back. But you wouldn't get a mail every day. You got, in our case, we got it once a week.
What a blessing it was to get it though, huh?
Sometimes we'd have 5
Great.
letters, and you see what we did as soon as we got it. I mean, it was just incredible. We also had other responsibilities to build a community, and one was to build the schoolhouse for the elementary kids of the families of the mountain yards that I deployed in action. So here we took ammo crates and everything else available, and I had a Chinese contractor down in Saigon that I could buy materials from, like concertina wire, wood, nails, hammers, and such. And we built this schoolhouse. Now what's significant here is this lady here is a nun, a Catholic nun. This one is a Catholic nun. So we built it for the priest and the village chief. And we actually used the information that we got from the nuns, unbeknownst to everybody else. But they would talk with the children. The children would tell us about the Viet Cong and the bad guys, and then they would tell us. So it increased our intel net. That was one way of doing it. That wasn't why we built the school. We built the school to give the kids something to do, the dependent children. Here's a picture of the kids. I'm sorry you can't see it too well. I don't know if you want to cut those lights down. We trained these people. We trained them in jumping out of airplanes, just the special forces guys, just the Loc Long Doc the Vietnamese. And then we trained all the others to battle in combat and how to live on the rations we gave them and the weaponry we gave them. This is just some of the support troops visiting the camp, and one of them is a Medal of Honor winner. He's an Air Force guy. Kind of strange for an Air Force guy to get a Medal of Honor, but he did at our camp right here. Harriet Willoughby. I also had to deal with a village, and this is the way I dealt with it. There's a village chief right here on the left, and then his council advises him. So we are on good relations. We drink the rice wine together and communicate on what needed to be done in the village. We built a fish pond. One thing I did, and I did wrong, I never confessed this to anybody, and I'm going to confess it to you. I did this thing wrong. I thought in my own inimical way, the Occidental way American thinks, these guys need to be, have a store, sell stuff, like their crossbows and their really keen hatchets that they use to whack a leg off in a minute. And those things that they built, and even their uniforms, these are indigenous, these are typical of the indigenous Cobo Mountain Guards. And I said, now you assemble all those, even a flag, the Viet Cong flag. I won't tell anybody that. But we would encourage them to build these things, and then we would bring in the people who would buy them. Who? The Americans and the visitors. They'd love to come in and buy all this stuff. So my way of thinking, I was building up the economy of the village, right? I mean, they were making money, they were happy, they were, reaching a higher level of achievement within their brain. And but then when the Americans left, what happened? Nobody to buy their crossbows, nobody to buy all that stuff. So that's one thing I did wrong. You do a lot of things right, and you do a lot of things wrong when you're in command of thousands of people. We had a buffalo feast periodically whenever we decided it was good for the atmosphere of the soldiers and so on. We would do it when we celebrated big achievements. We would do it whenever I felt that the troops were down low, depressed, AWOLs, and really not in touch with themselves and not talking to each other. And festivals or ceremonies, in our case, we'd take out a couple of buffaloes, go through the ceremonial aspect of the Montagnards' beliefs in their religion, their animal kind of believers. And we'd go through that, and they'd get the blood and mix it with the spirits and rice wine and put it on their bush and stuff like that. But we would go through that ceremony and celebration, and you wouldn't believe how well everybody got along after that. It had a big effect. All right, so this is VIPs. That's me right here, the tall guy. And then some of the other camp commanders, some of the district chiefs, and others. And then the downside of being one of these VIPs is that you have to eat the leftovers, I call it. Actually, that's the buffalo head and the interns and all those other things. We gave the good food to the troops. We gave them the ribs and the hinds and the arms and legs and stuff like that, the good meat. So they got the steaks, and we got what was left right here. One of the downsides of being a VIP. This guy is the district commander. This guy is his counterpart, American. This is my counterpart. Actually, Dai Huy Minh. When I first got to you, first lieutenant, now he's a captain. Dai Huy is a captain. Vietnamese. It's kind of an unusual shot. Now, I have to explain why, because this is probably the first time ever that an A-team commander, a B-team commander, and a C-team commander of Special Forces were in one place at one time, because we were spread out. Colonel Colonel Patch was up in Playcoon. Colonel Gillette was up in Pamatuit, and I was out in the ACAD. And these are our counterparts. So that's my counterpart, Natalie Min. That's Colonel Long, who later was immigrated to the United States, and he became the police chief of Houston. He's a two-star general later on. Now, that's my first tour, 1 year, Special Forces, and I wrote a book about it. Actually, what it is a diary that I wrote during the time I was there. And I was teaching ROTC at Army Navy Academy in 1986. And I brought my diary in, and I showed it to the cadets. And they said, we'll type this diary in if you will publish it. So they did, and I did. Here it is. That's 8 months as a commander of A232. Now my second trip, I said I was in 2 wars. This is 1969 and 70. I was blessed to be the operations officer of an infantry battalion in the 9th Infantry Division in the Delta. Around Saigon, over towards Cambodia, down into southern part of South Vietnam. And so President Nixon, as part of his withdrawal of forces and Vietnamization, and turned the war over to the Vietnamese, we kept hearing about all of this attacking from Cambodia and Laos into Vietnam, and then they would hide and they'd run back. And they had all their supplies over there in these 2 neutral countries of Cambodia and Laos. Huge amounts of supplies, weapons, ammunition, vehicles, tanks, you name it. It was over there, and we were constricted military-wise. We could not go across the border. That's just the rules of war engagement. So President Nixon saw that we had to go across. He allowed us, the Vietnamese and the Allies, to go across in May of 1970. Got 30 days to go in, clean all this stuff out, and kind of even it up for the South Vietnamese so they could finish the war, Vietnamization, and then we could get out of it. His goal, President Nixon, was to withdraw all the troops, which he did by 1973. So that area he's pointing to, it's hard to see on the map, but that's where I was, and that's where I took my battalion into Cambodia during those 30 days. We found a lot of stuff, and we gave it to the Vietnamese. So in 1973, President Nixon, along with his Secretary of State, who's the Secretary of State? Henry Kissinger. Both made an agreement with the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese, Viet Cong, and that allowed us to withdraw all of our troops, all of our fighting troops from Vietnam, which we did in 1973. And at the same time, all of our prisoners were returned. This is when 3 famous prisoners came back, 2 senators, 1 ran for president, 1 ran for vice president. But we got our prisoners back. Again, about 2,000 left in there, but nobody ever talks about them. Then they signed a peace treaty with the North Vietnamese. The South Vietnamese were not too happy with the treaty because it allowed everybody to come to the table who they didn't want to come to the table. Peace treaty. But at any rate, North Vietnamese signed this peace treaty, we signed this peace treaty, and we ended the war. Over for the Americans, right? Well, it didn't work out that way. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese came down, overran, and took over South Vietnam. And this is the final capitulation day, April 30th, 1975. And these are the American supporters and Americans on the last helicopter getting out, going over to Tan Son Nhut Airport, getting on an airplane and flying out. One of my colleagues came in this morning and was in the class this morning with it. She was one of the refugees They got on that last airplane and flew over to the Philippines and Guam, and then eventually back into Camp Pendleton. So that's what I want to talk about. After 1975, this is when the communists took over. They dubbed Saigon now Ho Chi Minh City in reverence to their leader, Ho Chi Minh, who was dead then. And then they had to manage this whole South Vietnam. Lead it, put in the leadership, the Congress, the district chiefs, and all that. Well, they did it, but they got rid of everybody who supported the Allies, the Americans, and they put them in re-education camps. And then some of them, they actually sent a lot of the colonels and the generals and the other people who of South Vietnam were sent up into North Vietnam to really POW camps. I mean, really horrendous camps. So they went from general one day to a member of the re-education camp the next day. So that was 1975. April 30th is the day. And so those people that left before April 1975, like my friend that was in your earlier class, she was 3 years old at the time, but she went up here to Camp Pendleton. So the commander of Camp Pendleton was given the mission, hey, you're gonna get 20,000 Vietnamese refugees in here next week, now get your shit together and do it. Had to come up with 8 camps, Quonset hut camps, tents, the food, the bedding, the clothing, to take care of these 20,000 refugees. That was the number prognosticated on this article in the Union Tribune, San Diego, on April 30th, 1975. And sure enough, up to 50,000 people came through that camp at Camp Pendleton, Camp Telegra. It was up here in the northwestern side of Camp Pendleton. You don't see it there today. You see a big monument there. That's the first slide I showed, Camp Telegra. And my buddy lives right across here on the golf course, and he pointed to it one day and said, that's where the Vietnamese refugees were. He lives in Saint Clemente, right there, he said. So this is a family that was going through there at the time. There's some of the kids. Now think about this. What's in the mind of those kids? What's in the mind of the adults who just lost their country, lost their war, lost all of their possessions, and got to Camp Pendleton? The kids were actually out there being a kid, having fun. And that's demonstrated in a lot of different ways. But think of the parents of these kids. What happened to them? And this is another picture of the whole group. Now, that's one phase from 1975. Now we're going to go up to after 1975. Roughly the 1978-79 period is when the most of the people tried to escape the tyranny of Vietnam, and we call them boat people. Why boat people? Because they just tried to get out of, this is Vietnam now, it's one country now. And my friend got on this boat and went over here to Palawan, Philippines. He had quite a journey doing that, so he told wonderful stories. I said, make a book out of it. So he published a book. Sam Lee and Lee, my interpreter, that I knew back in 1966, and then he escaped. He was in 4 re-education camps, 4 prison camps. And he finally built the boat and put 50 people in there and wound up in the Philippines. And he's a very successful businessman today. I talked to him last night. He's up in Spokane, Washington. You wonder why Spokane, Washington? He's just kind of a different kind of guy, because all the other South Vietnamese, when they came over here, they went to Houston, Texas, Orange County, right here in San Diego. They went to the warm places. They didn't go up where Sam Lee and Lee went up in Spokane, Washington. That's him, Sam Lee and Lee, my interpreter. At that time, he was like 20 years old. And this is him today. We were up there in Oregon a couple years ago. So that's Sam and me. We get together all the time. Now, when he first asked me to publish his book, which I did, but then he got a real publisher to do it later, and that's Tate Publishing Company did this. They went bankrupt anyway. But I liked the book so well, I decided to, that's this book right here that he and I are showing at the Special Forces Convention, which we try to go to. We don't go annually, but every now and then we go to a Special Forces Convention. And so this is Sam and his family, and that's Sam, and that's his wife Tammy, and then these are his offspring. So his son, 3 sons, and their wives and family. I bring it up because he's one that came out in 1979, I believe it, refresh your memory. He actually escaped, and that's what the book is all about. He got out of there. So you'll hear later from the professor over here, doctor, about the higher need for freedom in the brain, the higher need for security and that sort of thing. That's what he was going for. This is at another Special Forces Convention. Me and Sam right here. And then this is a Medal of Honor, another Medal of Honor winner in 1964. Roger Donlin, this guy here that our chapter is named after, got his Medal of Honor. And then me and Sam. The book was so good, I decided to write a screenplay about it, and I called it Heaven's Perfect Hour, after Ralph Waldo Emerson's concept of Heaven's Perfect Hour. That's when Sam escaped from Vietnam, but that's a pretty good screenplay. And we decided to make a movie out of it if we could. So we went to all these movie festivals and what have you, and trying to figure out how you do that. How do you make a movie out of this thing? And here we're talking, he's talking to one of the movie stars of this movie right here, All About Dad. And these are the other 3 key actors in that movie. So we met all kinds of people. What do you think, Tom? Can we run that thing now?
Let's see.
I don't know if this thing will run or not. Yeah, if it doesn't, it's okay.
I don't know if the link is embedded in it, sir. I'm not sure.
I probably did put it in there, so.
And being that it's no longer, let me double check one thing real fast. I'm gonna tab out of it real fast.
Lead into
See if, yeah, no, it's not.
I wouldn't worry about it. What I was going to show you was the actual preview of the movie. We haven't made the movie yet, but we have these dreams that we're going to make a movie out of it. And that's what that was. It was a preview. So, just before this, that's the diary that I published, wrote back in 1966, published recently. And then this is Sam and his book. It's Sam Lee, my interpreter book. Wonderful book. He sold 5,000 copies already. And then my screenplay. These are all on Amazon if you want to go look them up. To do that. I think on time we're running pretty good, but